What if there was a book so dangerous to the established world order that for millennia, people tried to erase it from history? A book that tells a completely different story of humanity. Today, we're talking about the Kolbrin Bible. This ancient text, which the Egyptians themselves simply called the Great Book, held knowledge that contradicted everything we've been taught. One of its main sanctuaries was the legendary Library of Alexandria, the greatest treasure trove of wisdom in the ancient world. We're used to hearing about its destruction as a tragic accident, a series of fires and wars. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if it was a deliberate, cold-blooded crime against knowledge itself? Picture this place, not just a warehouse of scrolls, but a living, breathing think tank of the ancient world. A melting pot of ideas where the mathematics of Pythagoras sat alongside Babylonian astronomy, Plato's philosophy next to the mystical teachings of Egyptian priests, and the medicine of Hippocrates beside the secret knowledge of the Druids. It was a place where the wisdom of all humanity was gathered under one roof. And among the hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were those that made up the Great Book, a book that told the story of humanity long before officially recognized history. A book describing a cosmology where the universe was not a divine whim, but a complex, orderly mechanism. A book that held the memory of cycles of great destruction and the rebirth of civilizations that followed. And then, one day, it all disappears. It turns to smoke and ash. Official history, like a shame-faced schoolboy, mutters something incoherent. First, they blame Julius Caesar, whose fleet supposedly set fire to part of the library by accident. Then, centuries later, they talk about the Roman Emperor Aurelian, who destroyed the city in 273 AD. Then, as if by chance, a legend emerges about rampaging Christians destroying pagan temples, and along with them, the library. And to cover the tracks completely, they add another legend about Arabs who supposedly heated their baths with scrolls for 6 months. Look at this picture. 4 different culprits spread out over nearly 1,000 years. This isn't history. It's a convenient smokescreen created to hide the truth. It's a classic case of shifting the blame while the real culprit slips into the shadows. When a crime has so many suspects, the real culprit is likely the one with the strongest motive. Not just to capture a city or win a war, but an ideological motive. A motive for the total, unconditional destruction of an alternative point of view.
Ask yourself, who was most threatened by a library where one question could have hundreds of different answers? The answer is obvious. The one who came into the world with a single, indisputable answer to all questions. A new, rising ideology could not tolerate competition. It didn't need Plato's dialogues debating the nature of the soul or Egyptian texts speaking of gods in the plural. It didn't need a history that was older than its own. All this wisdom was declared pagan heresy, a dangerous poison for the mind. And the best cure for such a disease is fire. The library wasn't just a storehouse of knowledge. It was a symbol of the old world, a world of diverse beliefs and ideas. And to build a new world on its ruins, that symbol had to be destroyed. This fire didn't start in the scrolls. It ignited in the minds of men. And to understand the motive, you have to look into the eyes of those who carried the torch and hear the words they used to justify their actions. You need to see just how desperate and ruthless that battle of ideas was. Imagine the situation of the early followers of the new faith. They brought the world a story that they believed was unique and the one absolute truth. A story of a divine teacher, born of a virgin, who suffered, left this world, and was resurrected, ascending to heaven. But when they shared this message with the educated people of the Roman Empire, the Greeks or the Egyptians, they were met with a bewildered shrug, because these kinds of stories were painfully familiar to them. The ancient world was saturated with myths of gods and heroes who followed similar life paths. For millennia, the Egyptians had worshipped Horus, born of the immaculate Isis. The Phrygians told of Attis, born of the virgin Nana. The Greeks knew the story of Perseus, whose mother, Danae, conceived him from a golden shower sent by Zeus. The myth of Mithras, born from a rock on the winter solstice, included shepherd witnesses, a last supper, and an ascension into heaven. The similarities were not just superficial, they were structural, deep. And this created a colossal problem for the new faith. How could you prove you were special if your central story looked like just another retelling of an old, familiar plot? This is where one of the first and most influential Christian apologists, Justin Martyr, enters the scene. In his writings, he didn't deny the obvious. On the contrary, he admitted the similarities head-on, with disarming frankness. He wrote, "When we Christians say that Jesus Christ, our teacher, was begotten without intercourse, was crucified, died, rose again, and ascended into heaven, we are saying nothing different than what you already believe when you worship your gods, the sons of Jupiter." Elsewhere he states directly, "He, Jesus, was born of a virgin. Accept this in the same way you believe in Perseus." It seems like an admission of defeat. But what Justin does next is a brilliant and at the same time terrifying move in its consequences. He offers an explanation for these similarities. According to him, it's not a coincidence or borrowing. It's all the work of the devil. According to his logic, the devil was so cunning and foresighted that he appeared hundreds and thousands of years before the birth of Christ and deliberately created fakes and parodies of the coming events in the pagan world. He told the stories of Horus, Mithras, and Perseus in advance so that when the true Messiah appeared, people would be confused and unable to tell the truth from the devil's counterfeit.
Think for a moment about the power of that statement. This was a masterful piece of psychological jujitsu. In one fell swoop, the most ancient religions and myths in the world, the entire spiritual treasury of humanity, were declared not just a mistake, but a malicious deception, a diabolical plagiarism. Ancient wisdom was turned into propaganda from hell. It was an ideological nuclear strike. The phrase, "We are just like you, but we are from God and you are from the devil," became the universal justification. Now let's return to the Library of Alexandria. After such a declaration, what did the scrolls containing Egyptian, Greek, and Persian myths look like in the eyes of a zealous follower of the new faith? They were no longer cultural heritage. They became the devil's weapons, deceitful manuscripts created to tempt the righteous. And you deal with the enemy's weapons simply. You destroy them. Burning such books was no longer an act of vandalism, but a godly deed, an act of spiritually cleansing the world of filth. It became a license for intellectual genocide. And they set to work with enthusiasm, believing they were spreading the light of truth by burning away the darkness of lies. They thought they had destroyed everything, that the fire had consumed every dangerous thought, every alternative history. But they were wrong. The most valuable things are always hidden best, and while the greatest library in the world burned, a few rescued scrolls of the Great Book began their long, secret journey through the centuries. Thus began the 1,000-year journey of the Forbidden Book. Someone, whose name history has not preserved, understood the true value of this knowledge. Perhaps it was one of the rash priests of the old faith, or a wise librarian who saw the world around him descending into the flames of fanaticism. These people understood. They had to save not just parchment, but the key to understanding the past and the future. Risking everything, they carried the surviving fragments out of the fire and chaos. According to some accounts, copies were secretly transported by trade caravans to the east, and traces of them can even be found in India. But the main and best preserved body of texts traveled north to Europe. Here begins the most amazing part of this story. The book was not entrusted to kings, priests, or powerful orders. Its guardians became an informal, secret alliance of people whom the powerful would never have suspected of possessing such a great secret. They were ordinary people. Farmers, craftsmen, peasants, village elders. The modern publishers of the book claim this was a conscious choice based on deep wisdom. The members of this unspoken order were held to the highest moral standards. The main criterion was not literacy or nobility, but purity of heart and thought.
The reason was simple and brilliant. The knowledge contained in the Great Book was too powerful. If it fell into the hands of a person with power, a king, a general, or a high priest, the temptation to use it for selfish purposes, to manipulate people, to strengthen their own power, would have been too great. The text could have been distorted, edited, with inconvenient parts torn out, or conversely, things added that were never there. But a simple person, whose life is connected to the land and labor, saw the book not as a tool of power, but as a source of wisdom that helps to understand the world and one's place in it. He was a guardian, not a master. For hundreds of years, while wars, epidemics, and religious purges raged across Europe, handwritten copies of the Great Book were passed from generation to generation, from hand to hand, in complete silence and secrecy. This continued until the 12th century. The book found refuge in one of the most mysterious and ancient places in England, Glastonbury Abbey. This place was already shrouded in legends of King Arthur, the Holy Grail, and the secret knowledge of the Druids.
The Abbey was famous for its huge library, which housed the rarest manuscripts that had survived the Dark Ages. It seemed the book had finally found a safe harbor. But history, as we know, likes to repeat itself. In 1184, a terrible fire broke out in the Abbey. Whether it was an accident or another act of deliberate destruction of wrong books, we will never know. But the flame that once consumed the Library of Alexandria had once again reached the forbidden knowledge. The huge library of antiquities was almost completely destroyed. And again, just as in Egypt 1,000 years earlier, at the most desperate moment when all seemed lost, the guardians made their choice. Instinct told them to save the most valuable thing, and they rushed into the fire, not for golden covers or richly decorated gospels. They saved a massive scroll, heavily charred at the edges, which they considered the heart of their collection. This miraculously saved manuscript later became known as the Kolbrin Bible. The fire damaged it, but could not destroy its essence. After this fire, the Celtic guardians, realizing that no walls could guarantee safety, took the book even deeper into the shadows. They not only preserved it, but also studied it for several centuries, comparing the ancient Egyptian text with their own Druidic wisdom and adding their comments and interpretations. To ensure its preservation, part of the text was even transcribed onto thin bronze plates, which is why the manuscript received another name, the Bronze Book. Only in the 15th century was a part of this knowledge first presented to the public. Rescued from the fire, this book, which we today call the Kolbrin Bible, consists of 2 unequal parts. 6 of them are that same ancient Egyptian original, and the other 5 are the works of the Celtic guardians. And what it tells us about our origin, about the very beginning of the world, turns everything upside down.
When we open its first pages, we immediately understand why it was so feared. It offers no comforting tales or easy answers. Instead, it challenges the very foundation of our worldview from the first lines. We read, "On earth, there is no true beginning, for here everything is an effect, and the ultimate cause is elsewhere." Think about that. Everything we see, everything we consider cause and effect, birth, life, death, the changing of seasons, all of it is just a ripple on the water. And the stone thrown into the pond is somewhere in a completely different, inaccessible dimension. The book tells us right away, you are looking in the wrong place. To understand what is happening here, you must first look to where it all began. And it transports us to this before the beginning, to a state that is impossible to describe in human words, but the authors try. Before the beginning, there was nothingness, but it was not an empty, dead blackness. It was a void filled with potential. In it, there was only one thing, the eternal, unified consciousness. The book doesn't call it God in our usual sense. There is no image of an old man on a throne, no personality with emotions and desires. It is something else, an impersonal, self-sufficient, eternal spirit, a generator of selfhood which cannot be diminished, unknown, unknowable, contemplative, alone in a deep, unknowable silence. It simply was. Beyond time, beyond space, in an abode of uncreated light that no one could see. Within it slept everything that would ever be, but in an unexpressed, dormant form. In this absolute peace and immutability, the very concept of time did not exist, and here the book gives one of the most elegant and profound definitions imaginable. It says, "Time no longer slept in the bosom of God, for now there was change, and before everything remained unchanged, and change is time." Time was not created as a separate entity. It was born at the very moment when the eternal, motionless consciousness performed its first action, produced the first change. As long as everything is static, there is no time. But as soon as one movement, one change occurs, a sequence arises, before and after. This sequence is time. It is the product of motion, a measure of change in the universe. And as long as stars move in their orbits, as long as living beings are born and die, time will exist. And so, this eternal, solitary consciousness decided to manifest itself, to express the infinite potential that slumbered within it. It wanted to know itself through its creation. And then the act of creation occurred. But this was not building from clay or sculpting from chaos. The universe, as the book says, arose as a congealment of God's thought. It is a materialized thought. And when this thought took form, when it burst forth in myriads of stars and galaxies, something paradoxical happened. The creation was so grandiose, so all-encompassing and dazzling, that it completely overshadowed its creator. The creator became invisible behind the veil of his own creation. He, as the text says, became veiled from all that proceeded from himself. By creating the world, the creator hid himself.
This idea is the key to the entire narrative of the Kolbrin Bible. The universe is not just a house that God built and left. It is a gigantic, incredibly complex puzzle, a divine game of hide and seek. Creation became both the manifestation of the Creator and the veil that hides him. He is present in every grain of sand, in every leaf, in every ray of light, yet he remains invisible, like an artist who has dissolved into his canvas. He is vaguely reflected in his creation, but the creation itself cannot explain itself. To unravel this mystery, to look behind the veil, this, according to the book, is the main and only purpose of a rational being. Not just to live, reproduce, and survive, but to become an explorer, to figure out the design, and ultimately to return to one's original, spiritual form, realizing oneself as part of that same unified consciousness. Man was conceived as the universe's answer to itself. But before the human explorer appeared, the stage had to be set for him, and the book describes this process of Earth's creation with astonishing details that resonate with modern scientific theories. In the very beginning, the text says, the Earth was completely covered with water. Then, under the influence of certain forces, the waters were gathered together, and from beneath them, the land unsteadily appeared. Later, the sun was created, which dried and strengthened the Earth's firmament. This scene, where the first continents rise from the world ocean, looks surprisingly familiar. Next, the spirit of life appears on the scene, emerging from the great celestial womb. The text describes its appearance as something material, some celestial body or force that caused colossal cataclysms on the planet, the formation of mountains, changes in the landscape. But thanks to the sun, this object was neutralized and placed under the authority of the sun's sister, the moon. The spirit was calmed, but the earth remained agitated. And in this changed, prepared environment, biological life begins to emerge. The book uses a vivid and simple image. Mud eggs of life potential formed in the swamps, at the junction of land and water. The sun gave life-giving warmth, and life crawled upon the earth. What is particularly important is that the book emphasizes everything that appeared in the world was not an accident. Every creation had a purpose, and this purpose was connected to the future appearance of man. Metals are hidden in her stones, precious stones in the soil. Gold and silver were scattered and hidden. There was copper for tools and wood for building, and a swamp of reeds and stones for every purpose. All this was prepared, all this was ready, and now the earth awaited the coming of man. This concept completely rejects the idea of random evolution. The world is presented as a huge, perfectly prepared workshop, filled with tools and materials. Have you ever wondered why a certain plant can heal a certain ailment? Why you can smelt metal from ore or make glass from sand? The book answers this simply. All of this was created for a specific purpose, so that man could use the world around him for creation, not for empty consumption.
And finally, the first man appears. The dust of the earth gave birth to the man, and the dark water enveloped the woman, and they united and multiplied. However, these first humans were not yet fully human in our understanding. They were part of nature, almost animals. They could eat, sleep, and procreate, but they were incapable of cognition. They lacked the tool to look at the heavens and ponder the Creator. They were beautiful biological creatures, but they lacked the main thing, a spark. According to Indian legends, this was the first unsuccessful humanity, whose descendants are supposedly apes. In any case, the world was ready, the stage was set, there were actors on it, but the play had not yet begun. Something more was needed to start the great mechanism of cognition. A great universal upheaval was required. And it struck. The Kolbrin Bible describes this moment not as a quiet, blissful act of creation in a paradise garden, but as a global, agonizing cataclysm. It was the great day, the day when the unthinkable happened, the merging of two opposites. The day when the Spirit, which is God, united with the beast, which is the earth.
At that moment, the divine, immaterial principle entered the physical shell of the first man, and the planet reacted to this event with primal horror. The text paints an apocalyptic picture. Then the earth writhed, tossing up and down. The earth moaned and shrieked with the wind. She wept in her rivers and her storms. This was not creation. These were planetary-scale labor pains. The world went mad. The climate was broken. Snow fell in the hot wastelands, and ice sheets covered the fertile plains. Geography changed before their eyes. Forests turned into seas. The usual order of things was destroyed to its foundations. And out of this chaos, out of this universal strife and calamity, a new man was born. The book emphasizes this moment with particular force. Man is not the crown of creation, peacefully strolling through Eden. He is a child of disaster, an heir of the creative struggle, a battlefield of extremes. He was born not in harmony, but in the agony of the world. His cradle was earthquakes and floods. The earth, his mother, nurtured man with a cautious affection, cradling him in the depths of her body. She gave birth to him in torment, and this firstborn, the son of earth, the grandson of God, was from the beginning an heir to sorrow and a student of suffering. This picture is radically different from the creation myths we are used to. It says that struggle, overcoming, and suffering are not punishment for sins, but an innate, fundamental property of human nature. We were born in struggle and for struggle. The man who emerged from this cataclysm was imperfect, a clumsy and uneducated creature, but he already had pride. And the earth, his mother, raised him above all other creatures and led him even into the presence of God, placing him on the great altar. And here, a mystery takes place. From unfathomable heights, from behind an impenetrable veil, God himself descended to this imperfect creature. He bent over him and breathed into man the breath of eternal life. This was not just a life-giving spirit. Into his sleeping body, God implanted a fragment of himself, a soul and a spark of divinity. In an instant, a mortal creature of flesh and blood became something more. It became an heir of God and of immortality.
This was an act of bestowing the greatest power and the greatest responsibility. From now on, man was not just to live on earth, but to rule over it. But that was only a small part of his new destiny. His true purpose became to unravel the circles of eternity. His destiny was to be an eternal search and striving. Man was no longer just an animal. He became the vessel of a divine spark, and this spark ignited in him an insatiable thirst for knowledge, a desire to return to his source. Along with this spark, man received an incredible gift: the ability to look behind the veil of reality, to see the world as it truly is, but as it turned out, only for a moment. And that moment changed everything. The book describes the most mysterious act of this divine intervention. Man slept, but God opened in him the great eye, and man saw a vision of unsurpassed glory. This was not a physical organ, it was the awakening of inner spiritual vision, the very third eye that the ancient Egyptians depicted in their frescoes, and that mystics of all cultures considered the gateway to higher knowledge. And through these gates, a flood of absolute reality poured over man. For one infinite moment, he ceased to be just a man. He became one with the deep world of eternity. Unbounded wisdom filled his heart, and he saw the entire universe not as chaos, but as a perfect, beautiful, and just mechanism. The veils of time and space fell away. The ages of time unfolded like a scroll before his eyes, and he saw written upon it all that was to come. He came to know the secret of the 7 spheres and the 3 realms. He saw the eternal fire of irresistible power. He felt within himself the thrill of an inexpressible love. In that moment, there was no longer I and God. The boundary was erased. He was in God, and God was in him. As the text says, then he was even God himself. He knew his true, immortal, and divine nature. He remembered everything. And then, God removed his hand from man, and man was left alone. The great vision was gone. The light went out. The gates closed. And man woke up. But he woke up a different person. Of the splendor he had experienced, only a vague and elusive memory remained, no more than the shadow of a dream. he was cast out of the ocean of eternity back onto the desolate shore of the material world. It is in this moment that the Kolbrin Bible gives its explanation for the very essence of human nature, our eternal dissatisfaction. Deep within his soul, like a smoldering ember under a layer of ash, a spark of remembrance remained. And this spark, this faint echo of the perfection he had experienced, became the cause of his restless striving. Man began his journey on earth forever seeking something, without knowing what it was. He felt that there was something more, something incredibly important that he once knew, but could now neither see nor recall. This ghost-like memory constantly eluded him, pushed him, and tormented him. It is what makes us look at the stars, ask questions, create works of art, make scientific discoveries, and seek spiritual paths. All human curiosity, all our striving for great deeds and thoughts, it is merely an echo of that vision. We are searching for what we once saw, but have forgotten. This is our eternal quest.
And so man woke up. The revelation was gone, and all around was only the grim reality of the untamed space of the earth. But when he stood up, he was not afraid. In the depth of his heart, thanks to that very spark, he knew that the keys of destiny are not on earth. He accepted the challenge nobly and with joy. This divine spark gave him the strength to overcome any hardship. The book says that all trials were given to him for growth. Hunger, to learn how to get food. Cold, to learn how to make clothes. Adversity, to temper his spirit. Every problem was a solvable task in this universal school. But the book asserts that all our earthly troubles, all this pedagogy of survival, are nothing compared to what has already happened once before. And here we come to the most shocking and forbidden secret of the Kolbrin Bible, the knowledge for which it was burned. This knowledge sounds simple and terrifying. From the very first lines of the next chapter, the book declares, "From ancient times there has been a knowledge that there was not one creation, but two, a creation and a recreation. The wise man knows the fact that the earth was once utterly destroyed and then was reborn in the second wheel of creation." Stop and think about these words. Everything we know, all our history, all our religions, all our science, it is the history of only the second world. It is the second chapter of a book, the first of which was not just torn out, but burned, and the ashes scattered to the wind. There was a whole era, a whole creation before us, which was destroyed so completely that almost nothing remains of it, except for vague myths of a golden age and a great flood scattered across all the cultures of the planet. But how did this first creation perish? It was not a slow decline or a random natural disaster. The book claims it was a deliberate, controlled act of destruction. And it names the force that became the instrument of this destruction. The final phrase of this chapter sounds like a verdict that sends a chill down your spine. During the great destruction of the earth, God caused a dragon from the heavens to come and encompass her. What was this first creation wiped from the face of the earth? What was this heavenly dragon that became a tool in God's hands? And the most important question, is our entire civilization, with all its achievements and tragedies, just a second, and perhaps not the last, attempt? The answers to these questions lie in the depths of the Kolbrin Bible, which we will continue to explore.